Nobody's been kicked out, so I'm assuming that means your party has not determined anyone to be guilty of what this report says.
I don't think that's an accurate assumption to make.
Yeah, which is just chucking toothbrushes out of airplanes. Hey, Pierre Polyev.
WTF. Here, here.
Today on June 9th, we have Vashi that is interviewing the boo-hoo lady about treason in Canada. Let's have a listen.
Report that concludes there is, quote, troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. Now the opposition Tories are urging the federal government to name names.
Canadians have a right to know who and what is the information. Who are they?
The Leader of the Opposition knows very well that no government, including the government of which he was a member, is going to discuss particularities of intelligence information publicly, so he knows better than that.
But the feds and the chair of the committee responsible for the report say it's up to law enforcement to decide if any MPs broke the law. In a statement, the RCMP says in part that it can, quote, confirm there are investigations into a broad range of foreign interference in Canada, including matters which intersect with democratic institutions. The RCMP, the statement goes on to say, though, will not provide comment whether there is an active criminal investigation into any parliamentarian. The report also states China and India are the most prominent perpetrators when it comes to foreign interference in this country. So should Canadians know who these parliamentarians are? Jennifer O'Connell is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Public Safety Minister. Michael Chong is the Conservatives' Foreign Affairs critic. And Alistair McGregor is the NDP's Public Safety critic. Hi, everybody. Good to have you here today. I appreciate you making the time. Ms. O'Connell, I'll start with you. Your government, as we said in the introduction, has said that it's up to the RCMP or law enforcement more generally to investigate and then pursue charges if it's warranted. But we heard from the director of CSIS this week who said because of the difficulty of presenting intelligence as evidence or turning it into that in a court of law, there are other avenues through which this should be pursued. For example, somebody can be determined not able to run in a nomination or kicked out of caucus. Why is your government not even allowing for that?
Well, in fact, we are allowing for party leaders to get security clearance and be able to read the full unredacted report, which will provide them with additional insight. But the same challenges around intelligence to evidence also exist if there was to somehow be a list of names released without context and ensuring that any sort of intelligence is also corroborated. We think that the rule of law in this country and democracy relies on the fact that there needs to be that evidence, there needs to be that independent investigation. But we are allowing for leaders, and I believe the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, as well as Elizabeth May, the Green leader, have agreed to have their security clearance continue and read the full report, and they can make also determinations if it impacts them.
Sure. So my question, though, is about what your party and your government is doing, and I have questions for the opposition about what their leaders are going to do in a moment. Conservatives' Foreign Affairs critic, and Alistair McGregor is the NDP's Public Safety critic. Hi, everybody. Good to have you here today. I appreciate you making the time. Ms. O'Connell, I'll start with you. Your government, as we said in the introduction, has said that it's up to the RCMP or law enforcement more generally to investigate and then pursue charges if it's warranted. But we heard from the director of CSIS this week who said because of the difficulty of presenting intelligence as evidence or turning it into that in a court of law, there are other avenues through which this should be pursued. For example, somebody can be determined not able to run in a nomination or kicked out of caucus. Why is your government not even allowing for that?
Well, in fact, we are allowing for party leaders to get security clearance and be...
Your leader has read the unredacted report, does know who the MPs are. So far, Canadians have no evidence that your party or your government has pursued any other investigation about the possibility of those MPs or those senators acting as foreign agents. Why not?
Well, I wouldn't say that's accurate in the sense that, as the ministers confirmed, the director of CSIS as well, is that this information is in the hands of law enforcement and it's shared there. And
it's actually not. There's no confirmation of that. The RCMP won't confirm that. No. And not everything has been referred according to the NZCOP report.
But this is the point that if there is intelligence that has corroboration and leads to evidence, that there are mechanisms and there are laws in this country to deal with that. In addition to that, what my colleagues here and I'd like to acknowledge the hard work that Mr. Chong and Mr. Mr. McGregor is doing on the additional enhancements with C-70 to deal with the CSIS Act, which would actually give us more tools in information sharing in situations like this. So there is action being taken, but it's important to remember that intelligence is like a piece of a puzzle, and that it's the entire puzzle that forms the evidence, and it's something that we have to stay focused on.
Well, just to be clear, the RCMP actually, prior to C-70 and a whole lot of other things that your government could have, or in the case of some of the advocates should have done, asked for legislative means to be more able to turn intelligence into evidence. That is not part of the new legislation that you introduced, and the RCMP commissioner told me that one-on-one. As far as the bar that is required in order for your party to act at all on the possibility of foreign agents, why is it an evidentiary bar? Why is it that there has to be a conviction or the RCMP make that determination? The Prime Minister had no problem when it came to accusing India of being behind the murder of a Canadian citizen to rely simply on intelligence and say in the House of Commons that that was the case.
I don't think anybody suggested that the party can't take measures when it comes to serious allegations, and I don't think anybody suggested that it would require criminal charges, but there are party mechanisms to do so. It's something that would have to be based, though, on corroborated evidence and intelligence, and a determination can be made. But these pieces are also moving as more information becomes available. And I think that it is incumbent on everybody to take this seriously and to look at processes to put in place measures when there are serious allegations.
Just very quickly before I move on to your colleagues, am I to infer from that that your party has investigated this, that you have looked into the possibility of there being foreign agents and determined that there are not? Because I'm not clear. You at first did say it has to go to law enforcement. Now you're saying there's other mechanisms. Have you pursued any of them?
No, what I said earlier was that to the calls to release names without caveats, without context, is something that in this country we rely on the rule of law. When it comes to party politics and the nomination process and the green light process,
nobody's been kicked out. So I'm assuming that that means your party has not determined anyone to be guilty of what this report says.
I don't think that's an accurate assumption to make. And I think
so what is accurate?
Well, I think what's accurate is that those who have the security clearance can review the information, can determine if there is another process or more work needs to be done.
I.e. Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland know exactly what's going on. If Chrystia is on that list, yeah, because she is on the Chinese Climate Change Board. Does she get paid for that? And the World Economic Board, she does something. So she get paid for that, or kickbacks, or a free little vacation now and then, or a little lodging? Who knows? Maybe the CRA can answer that. But all of this is just, it's such a nightmare. This will all come out when Trudeau's gone next year in October, 100% sure who these people are. It will just be a disaster. It's almost like the Trudeau can't have an election now because it would devastate about the corruption that has happened. And Trudeau, the guy that commits all these scandals and gets away with it, sets a precedent downward for every MP on what you can get away with. That's really what the issue is, that it's the leader that is the one that gets away with so much. Remember the orange? Someone charged $13 for orange juice in Harper government and got let go. Trudeau has done 1,000 times worse and more often. And the guy still is, he thinks he's some superstar. I mean, his whole family left him after too. It's been a disaster for the last 10 years. All these KPIs coming out saying the economy is doing bad and horrible. And you just have Trudeau going on saying he's changed the poverty numbers and now they're increasing, and nobody believes him anymore. Nobody believes anything that he says. It's been 10 years, even on any government. 10 years is too much. But this has just gone on for so long. It's just going to be the next couple of months until there's an election. It's just going to be like, it's just going to be so bad to what's really going to happen when he finally gets out and we all understand what's going on.
But making these hypothetical accusations of who is or isn't involved without context and corroboration of intelligence evidence, I think becomes very problematic in that becoming the party process in this country.
Okay, I'll circle back to that in a moment. I want to bring Mr. Chong into the conversation because you heard Ms. O'Connell talk about, I think what was referenced this week in testimony from both the NSIA, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, and the head of CSIS, both of whom essentially said just because your leader is briefed on this intelligence does not mean that he can't act. In fact, it means he could act on that information. You had thought last week when we did an interview then that would not be the case. Why not get briefed? Why could Mr. Poilievre now not just get that information and then act on it?
Well, I think they're not correct in saying that. Here's why. What the Prime Minister is asking Mr. Poilievre to do is to essentially tie his hands behind his back, and here's why. The Prime Minister is asking Mr. Poilievre to go through the Treasury Board Secretariat's policy on government security. That's the same process that other individuals on, for example, on NSICOP have gone through. That process would require Mr. Poilievre to sign an undertaking and to swear an oath of secrecy, not to divulge this information to anyone else, and therefore not be able to tell anybody else to act on this information to hold individuals accountable.
Respectfully, am I supposed to believe you over the director of CSIS?
Yes, you are, because I think the director of CSIS and the RCMP may not be as knowledgeable about the processes under the Reform Act that govern party caucuses in the House of Commons and the other processes internal to parties that govern the conduct of their members and
But maybe they're less worried about those processes and have national security law in mind instead.
Look, just to get into the details, the leader has no authority to remove a member from caucus in the Conservative caucus. Under the Reform Act rules, that is up to the 120 or so elected members of Parliament on a secret ballot vote, and they're certainly not going to vote without information. The point is, though, is this.
But what if Mr. Poilievre were to say, it's this person that I have learned has national security concerns? Nothing specific, just I'm very concerned about national security. You don't think that MPs in your party would understand what that means?
As I understand the Treasury Board Secretariat's policy on government security, Mr. Poilievre would not be able to divulge the identity of any of those individuals to anyone else, which is the same reason why the NSICOP committee is unable to divulge the names of the individuals. And so the Prime Minister is asking the leader of the Conservative Party to tie his hands behind his back, to sign an undertaking, to swear an oath of secrecy that would prohibit him from acting on that information by instructing others or telling others what happened so that action could be taken. It's not a policy that the Prime Minister himself is subject to. And that's why we're calling on the Prime Minister to publicly release the names of those parliamentarians who knowingly and wittingly assisted a foreign state to the detriment of Canada and its people.
But they're accused of that. We don't know that that's the same thing as it happened
no,
for sure.
They are,
and to throw their names out there, I mean, you're accusing someone of treason.
It's exactly what the Prime Minister did last September when he revealed classified information about another foreign interference threat. Well, we didn't criticize.
I challenged Ms. O'Connell on the same point.
We didn't criticize him. We didn't criticize the government for releasing that information. We criticized the government for the way in which they handled the release of that information. That's the fine point.
I remember the criticism standing. Why make it public in this way without meeting a specific bar? This is just intelligence.
But that did not concern the conduct of a member of the House of Commons. And these allegations, this information, concerns the conduct of several members of Parliament in the last Parliament and in the current Parliament. And the threshold for being a member of Parliament should not be that you committed a criminal offence against the interests of the people of Canada. It should be a bar that says that you owe a duty to your constituents and to the people of Canada. And clearly, that bar was violated when members of the House conveyed confidential information to foreign intelligence officers and to a foreign state.
I think it's serious. That's why I wanted to do this panel. I don't disagree with that anyway. Yeah. I'll get you in a second, Mr. McGregor. But just on the point of whether or not, I understand that you have a view of what happens when Pierre Poilievre is briefed. The accusation from the government is essentially he doesn't want to be briefed because he wants to make this political. Do you have, look, I'm just asking you to respond. Is it worth a conversation with Mr. Vigneault? Is it worth a conversation with the NSIA to discuss why their interpretation is you can act and why yours is not?
We have been anything but political or partisan on this issue. We have never raised the issue of the member for Don Valley North in Parliament till the reports that have come out recently. We have never suggested that any other member of Parliament of any particular party is responsible for these foreign interference threat activities. The fact of the matter is this. The report itself, the NSICOP report, said that as far back as 2018, the Prime Minister was told about national security threats to Parliament and to our elections. He was told that the measures in place at the time were not sufficient to protect Parliament. He was told at the time that he needed to take additional actions to protect Parliament. In fact, the most senior civil servants 3 times went to him for approval for an action plan to protect Parliament. He withheld that approval. And through all of this, he has failed to act.
But I've asked them a lot of questions about that. I'm just asking you, why not get more opinions, have a conversation to find out if you can get that info? If someone's in your caucus, don't you want to know?
We want to know the names of the members of Parliament who colluded with foreign states to the detriment of Canada. We want those names public. We want them public now. And those people, regardless of the caucus in which they sit, need to be held accountable. And that needs to happen now. We're calling for the release of all those names.
Okay, Mr. McGregor.
Is it an unreasonable request to have release the people's names after how many years has it been? 3, 4 years now of all this information? Trudeau's been briefed. He didn't do anything. If this comes out, it'll just show that all this stuff happened. Trudeau knew about it. He did nothing because it benefited him. It'll prove that Jagmeet knows about this too, or has suspected stuff, and he just accepted it. That's all the report will show, that those 2 guys are the most corrupt in Canadian history. So anyway, thanks for watching. We do have the other guy talking now too. Let's have a listen.
The perspective of the Canadian people. Ultimately, they want to go through the next federal election with the confidence that when they are choosing a name on the ballot, that politician has not been compromised by a foreign principle. And look, I think this has got to be a very nuanced conversation, and we have to rise above the partisan fray. Absolutely, I want to know the names. But I take issue with Mr. Chong's assessment of the situation. My leader, Jagmeet Singh, no other federal leader has experienced foreign interference, the consequences of foreign interference like Jagmeet Singh has. It has affected his personal life. This is personal to him. Now, he has received top secret clearance briefings. He is going to receive further briefings in the future. That has not compromised his ability to ask tough questions in the House and take principled positions. So
do you believe if he were to find out someone was in the NDP, he could act on that information through those briefings?
I believe there are avenues for leaders to act, absolutely. There's a way of doing this. And again, I asked the director of CSIS yesterday at committee whether it was in the interest of the intelligence community that as wide array of parliamentarians were briefed on this as possible, alluding to all leaders. He said, yes, it is in the interest of our democratic system, of the intelligence community, to have as many parliamentarians up to speed on this as possible. Some way we are going to find a way that the Canadian public can have confidence that when they cast a ballot, that person is not compromised by foreign intelligence.
To be clear, are you saying that those names should be released publicly, or do you just want party leaders to find them out?
I would like to find a way where we one day know their identities, but I again have to respect the fact that our intelligence community may have issues with how that's done. If we can find a process where we take care of that, because I don't want to burn our intelligence sources, I want to respect the hard work that our men and women in CSIS and the RCMP are doing. So I want to find a way, but again, I don't yet have the answer because I don't have that top secret clearance.
I just have time for one final question for you. And I was reading through that statement from Mr. Singh. You know, it was clear that he found it incredibly egregious that the Prime Minister has known about this, has known the names, has seen that intelligence since the end of March, and not acted on it. I have to ask you what I think a lot of Canadians will be thinking, which is, if you feel that's so egregious, why do you make sure he stays as Prime Minister?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we are at all times reviewing the agreement to see whether it's serving Canadians. But again, these issues are so fundamental to Canadian democracy, and if they're directly impacting our ability to have a fair election where everyone has confidence in it, I'm not sure now is the time for us to go into an election until we resolve these outstanding issues.
But that, I don't think that makes sense to Canadians. So you're okay to keep an agreement in place that keeps somebody at the helm of government whom you think could be allowing for foreign agents to remain in Parliament? Like, how can you square that circle?
Easily, because we're using multiple tools at our disposal. Like, let's walk through history here. Jagmeet Singh was the first leader who called forcefully for an inquiry. We got that done. He is a leader, unlike the leader of the Conservatives, who's received top secret briefing. We have been pushing this government through all of the parliamentary tools at our disposal.
But you're accusing them of doing nothing on this file.
Absolutely.
This could be people working on behalf of China and India.
And it's valid. And there are important oversight committees and committee of parliamentarians that are doing that work at pulling these threads and trying to get to the truth of the matter.
But you're okay if they remain in Parliament and the Prime Minister stays
well,
the Prime Minister?
that's an open question as we go forward. But I think there are a lot of unanswered questions right now that we don't yet have the answers to, and that I would like to pursue before we get to those critical points where we make these very consequential decisions.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, everyone, for making the time for this. Jennifer O'Connell, Michael Chong, and Alistair McGregor.